of the remarkable powers that therapists discover they have is not necessarily in what model of therapy they have adopted. It's in the power of listening. There's something remarkably healing and therapeutic about just finding somebody who will listen to you. There are many people in our country that would actually pay money just to have somebody who would sit down and listen to them. Do you understand how powerful listening is as a way to express love? I remember a number of years ago when I was teaching and I wanted to teach those who'd be going into pastoral counseling the technique of what's called effective listening, which means all the things that human beings do when we're really interested in what somebody is saying. The little nods and body language and encouragers that we give. And the assignment was simply to find somebody on campus that you don't know really well and start a conversation in which you can keep them talking for an hour. The result of this was not only they learned that they could, but inevitably they come back talking about the amazing power that had in the relationship. The other person would go away feeling that they had found a true friend, and often had ended up talking about things they had no idea they would open up and talk about with somebody they hadn't known that well. Listen to what the Psalm says in Psalm 116 and verses 1 and 2 about God. I love the Lord, for he heard my voice. He heard my cry for mercy. Because he turned his ear to me, I will call on him as long as I live. There is an amazing power in prayer if you genuinely understand that God hears you. Back in Victorian England, there was a blind, what's called a bivocational pastor now. His name was William Walford, Blind Billy, some people called him. He had a little trinket shop in the town of Colshire, which is just to the east of Birmingham in central England. And a friend of his, who was a pastor in one of the local churches named Thomas Salmon, stopped by his little shop one time and said, would you write me a poem about prayer? And so Blind Billy Walford sat down and came up with a poem and had it written down and composed. And when Thomas Salmon came back by, he handed it to him. About 3 years later, Salmon is in the United States and he's visiting friends. And he happens to take this poem that he thinks is really quite remarkable, gives it to the editor of the New York Observer. And on September 13th, 1842, in their little poetry section, they published this little poem by this author, unknown author in England, William Walford. It's picked up, it's read, people start sharing it. Just a few years later, it appears in the first hymnal in 1859. It's all about the amazing power we have when we know that God hears us. Perhaps you've heard this poem. Here are the words. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, thy wings shall my petition bear. To him whose truth and faithfulness engage the waiting soul to bliss. And since he bids me seek his face, believe his words, and trust his grace, I'll cast on him my every care and wait for thee, sweet hour of prayer. God bless.